He drove the crowbar into the padlock and pulled until the metal screamed. The shackles snapped. Dalton Reeves ripped the cargo door up its track, and 140 bags that belonged to strangers came sliding toward his boots like something exhaling. He had $900 invested in this moment and $11 left in his pocket. Behind him, his German shepherd would not step forward. The dog had stopped 4 feet from the truck, ears locked, body rigid, staring into that pile of luggage the way he'd stared at buried wire in Helmand. Dalton felt his stomach drop before he understood why. If you are watching this, do me one favor, subscribe, and stay with me all the way to the end, because this story does not go where you think it goes. And drop a comment telling me what city you are watching from. I want to see how far this one travels. The auction had taken 11 minutes. That was the part nobody understood about unclaimed baggage. People imagined a room full of collectors, paddles in the air, some auctioneer with a microphone working a crowd into a fever. It wasn't like that. It was a metal warehouse annex behind the Bangor Airport Freight Terminal 4 folding chairs, a clipboard, and a woman named Raina, who ran the whole thing off a laptop and clearly wanted to be somewhere else by lunch. Lot 14, 140 units mixed. Sold as his sight unseen, no returns, a buyer arranges transport. Dalton had bid $900. He'd bid it because $900 was the exact number in the coffee can under the passenger seat of his pickup. And he had counted it 4 times over 2 days, and the 4th time he had counted it, he had understood that the number was not going to grow. It had been 3 years of counting. 3 years of day labor and salvage runs and hauling traps for men who paid cash and didn't ask questions and didn't offer any either. 3 years of truck, bed, and a sleeping bag and a dog who never once complained. $900 was either going to become something or it was going to become nothing. Raina hadn't even looked up when he raised his hand. Sold. Cash or card? Cash. Of course it is, she'd said, not unkindly. Now the lot was sitting in a rented box truck. He had 4 hours to return, parked at the far end of the Rockland Fish Pier, because the pier was free and nobody there would call the police on a man unloading luggage onto asphalt. Nobody except the men on the pier, and they weren't calling anybody. They were just watching. Hey, Reeves. Sully Marchetti was leaning against the tailgate of his own truck with a coffee he had no intention of drinking because the coffee was a prop and the real event was Dalton. That's the whole thing. That's 140 bags. That's it. What did you pay? Dalton didn't answer. He paid 9, somebody else said. 900. Marty at the co-op heard it off the phone. Sully whistled long and low, and 2 of the other men laughed the way men laugh when they're relieved it isn't them. $900 for other people's regrets. Jesus, Dalton. You could have bought a decent outboard. An outboard don't come with mystery, another one said. Might be diamonds in there. Might be a dead guy. That got the biggest laugh. Dalton kept unloading. He had learned a long time ago that the only reliable defense against a group of men was to give them absolutely nothing to work with. And he gave them nothing. No glance, no flinch, no clever line back. He pulled bags down 2 at a time and set them in rows on the asphalt. And he made the rows straight because straight rows were the only thing in his life he still had complete authority over. I was 45 years old. He had 411 confirmed operational days across 9 deployments. He had a trident he kept in a sock in the glove box because he couldn't stand to look at it and couldn't stand to throw it away. And he was standing on a fish pier in Maine in a black and red flannel shirt and a burnt orange leather jacket worn through at both elbows, sorting other people's abandoned underwear in front of an audience. He did not let his face move. Come on, Reeves, Sully called. Say something, you're killing me. He's working, said a voice from the pier office door. That shut them up faster than anything Dalton could have said. Delia Keller had a way of arriving at the exact center of a conversation without anyone seeing her walk into it. She had a clipboard against her hip and reading glasses pushed up into her hair, and the specific flat patience of a woman who spent 40 hours a week reconciling other people's arithmetic. You boys got landings to weigh, she said. Or is that today's second priority? They scattered. Not fast, but they scattered. Delia looked at the rows of bags on the asphalt. Then she looked at Dalton. She didn't say good luck, and she didn't say that was stupid, and Dalton appreciated both omissions more than she probably knew. There's a spigot on the north side of the office, she said. Water for the dog. Nobody'll bother you. Appreciate it. She went back inside. That was the entire conversation, and it was the kindest thing anyone had said to him in 9 days. The dog's name was Ronan, 6 years old, 92-pound sable in black, tan gold across the shoulders where the sun had lightened him, ears that never fully rested, a scar under the left shoulder that had healed into a smooth strip where no coat grew back. Dalton had been assigned him 4 years ago out of a transitional kennel program, with a folder so thin it was almost insulting vaccination records, a weight chart, one line about temperament, and a transfer date. That was it. No handler history, no prior assignment, no explanation of a scar that had clearly been stitched by somebody who knew exactly what they were doing. When Dalton had asked, the kennel coordinator had checked her screen, frowned, and said, "That's what came over. Sometimes the files just don't follow." He'd let it go. He'd been in no condition to push. He'd been 3 weeks out of a VA housing placement. He'd lost over a paperwork error. He still didn't understand, and a dog had seemed like the last uncomplicated thing available to him. 4 years, 1,200 nights in a truck bed. The dog had never once been wrong about anything. Which was why when Ronan refused to enter the cargo truck, Dalton stopped moving. He'd carried out maybe 30 bags. He turned around with 2 duffels in his left hand, and Ronan was standing exactly where he'd been standing for the last 10 minutes, 4 feet from the open cargo door. Not sitting, standing. Weight forward on the front paws, ears rigid, tail flat and still, not barking, not growling. That was the part that put ice down Dalton's spine. A dog that barks has decided something is a threat. A dog that goes silent and locks has decided something is information. Ronan, kennel, up. The dog didn't move. Ronan, nothing. The mouse nostrils were working small, rapid, deliberate, and his eyes were fixed on a specific point in the mass of remaining luggage, back left, low buried. Dalton set the duffels down. He had been out of the service for 6 years, and he had spent most of that time trying to convince his nervous system that it was allowed to stand down. It had never fully agreed, and right now the argument was over because his hands had gone cool and his hearing had sharpened, and the pier noise, the gulls, the winch motor, Sully's radio had dropped away into a soft nothing, and he was operational again without having chosen to be. "What do you have?" he said quietly. Ronan whined. Once, high and short. Dalton knew that sound. It wasn't alarm. It wasn't fear. It was the sound the dog made when he'd found something he had already been looking for. He worked for 2 hours and 40 minutes and found nothing worth $1. He'd known the odds going in. Unclaimed baggage moves through 3 layers of screening before it hits auction. The airline pulls anything valuable. The contracted handler pulls anything valuable a second time. And by the time a lot reaches a warehouse in Bangor, it is mostly clothing chargers, paperbacks, and the specific sad archaeology of people's ordinary lives. He opened bag after bag anyway. 31 bags clothes, 9 bags clothes and toiletries, 6 bags children's things, which he handled more carefully than the others and could not have explained why. 2 bags of textbooks, 1 bag containing nothing but 42 pairs of identical black socks, which under other circumstances he might have found funny. A camera with no memory card, a tablet with a spidered screen, a wedding album which he closed after the first page and set aside in its own spot on the asphalt because he was not going to sell that, and he was not going to throw it away either, and he'd figure out the third option later. By bag 71, the arithmetic had stopped being abstract. $900. He'd need to clear roughly $200 a week through the winter to keep gas in the truck and food in the dog and the propane bottle filled. He had planned this out on the back of a receipt in a diner in Waldoboro. He had told himself it was a business. It was not a business. It was a man betting everything he owned on the possibility that strangers had accidentally abandoned something valuable and the house had already collected. He sat down on the bumper of the box truck with his forearms on his knees and let himself feel it for exactly 10 seconds. That was the deal he'd made with himself years ago. 10 seconds of the truth, no more. And then you get up. You're 45. You're broke. You live in a truck. You just lost the last money you had. 10. He got up. Ronan was still standing 4 feet from the cargo door and had not moved in 2 hours and 40 minutes. The 88th bag was wrong. Dalton felt it before he saw it. He had his hand on the strap of a hard-shell rolling case, hauling it toward the door, and something underneath it shifted and gave with a completely different sound. Not the plastic knock of consumer luggage, but a low, heavy textile thud. He moved the hard case aside. Beneath it, wedged in against the truck's inner wall, was an olive drab duffel. Not a surplus store olive drab. Not the kind of thing a college kid buys online because it looks tactical. This was the real article, a military transport bag, faded to the pale sage that only comes from years of actual sun, with a snap hook closure worn silver at the contact points, and a torn, subdued name tape ghost on the flap where stitching had been picked out. Somebody had removed the name, not cut it, picked it out stitch by stitch, the way you do when you have time, and you care about the bag, and you don't want it obvious that a name was ever there. Dalton stood over it for a long moment. The wrongness of it was hard to articulate to anybody who hadn't spent a decade around this kind of gear. Civilian luggage ends up in unclaimed lots for boring reasons, bad tags, missed connections, people who die on vacation and whose families never chase down a suitcase. That's the whole ecosystem. It's mundane. Military transport duffels do not enter that ecosystem. They move on manifests. They have paper attached to them at every stage. They get chased. This one had come through a commercial baggage system with its name removed and had sat unclaimed long enough to be auctioned as garbage. Ronan, Dalton said. The dog came. Instantly, not hesitant, not investigating. He crossed those 4 feet like they'd been the only thing holding him back, and he'd finally been released, and he went straight to the duffel and put his nose against the flap and held it there, and then he sat and looked at Dalton. Every hair on Dalton's arm stood up. That's it, he said. That's what you've been on since we opened the door. Ronan didn't blink. Dalton crouched and unhooked the snap. The clothes were folded. That was the first thing, not stuffed, not rolled. The way travelers roll folded, square corners, aligned in the way a man folds when he has been folding the same way for 20 years and could do it unconscious. Dalton lifted the top layer out and set it on the truck floor and did not put it down carelessly, and he was aware of the care in his own hands and slightly unnerved by it. Under the clothes, a shaving kit empty, a pair of boots resoled twice laced and tied together in a specific bowline through the eyelet knot that Dalton had personally taught to 11 men. His breathing changed. Under the boots, a t-shirt wrapped around something small and dense. He unwrapped it. 2 dog tags on a ball chain, and the tags were wrapped in black electrical tape. Dalton's hands stopped working. Every operator does something to silence his tags. Some tape them. Some run rubber silencers over the edges. Some tuck them into a boot. It's not decoration, it's discipline, because sound gets men killed, and a tag that clicks in the dark is a sound you produced yourself. But the way a man tapes is like handwriting. Some go around the edge. Some sandwich the 2 tags face to face and wrap the whole thing into a single flat brick. This one was sandwiched, face to face, wrapped 4 times, then folded over on itself at the end so it could be peeled with a thumbnail. Dalton had watched a man do exactly that in exactly that sequence on the deck of a ship in the Gulf of Aden 100 times. He peeled the tape with his thumbnail. The name came up out of the metal. Keller Owen R. and Dalton Reeves sat down on the floor of a rented box truck on the Rockland Fish Pier and could not get any air into his chest. What's them? He had carried Owen Keller's casket. That was the thing that arrived first before the shock, before the questions, the physical memory of the weight. Left shoulder, 3rd position. Arlington, a Tuesday in a cold October 11 years ago. He'd been 34. He'd shaved that morning and cut himself twice because his hands weren't right, and the casket had been wrong. He remembered thinking it at the time and burying the thought immediately, the way you bury anything at a funeral. 6 men carrying a sealed casket, and the weight distribution had been wrong. Too light at the head, too even, no shift when they took the corner. A body has mass and mass moves. That casket had not moved. He'd told himself they use ballast. When there isn't a full recovery, they use ballast. Everyone knows that that's not a secret. That's just how it's done. And don't you dare think about it while his sister is 15 feet away. Owen Keller, 34 years old, killed during Operation Slackwater, Gulf of Aden. And in the official record, in the finding of the review board, in the summary that went to families, in the 2 paragraphs that a reporter for a Navy affairs outlet had reprinted almost verbatim, Petty Officer Keller had transposed 2 digits in a positional relay, and that error had put 4 men in a compartment that should have been cleared. 4 men died. Keller died. And the finding was that Keller had killed them. Dalton had never believed it. He had also never said so out loud, not once in 11 years, and he had spent a lot of nights understanding exactly what that made him. "Owen," he said. His voice came out wrecked. Ronan pushed his head under Dalton's arm and stayed there. I didn't hear the vehicle. That was how far gone he was. A man with 411 operational days did not hear a diesel pull onto a fish pier and idle for 30 seconds and shut down 40 feet behind him. That's a hell of a haul. Dalton got the tags into his jacket pocket before he turned around. He didn't decide to do it. His hand did it. The man crossing the asphalt was somewhere in his 60s, heavy through the chest in a canvas coat with a company name stitched over the heart, Pike Salvage and Freight. He walked without hurry, and he smiled without effort, and he had the specific ease of a man who has never in his life had to wonder whether a conversation was going to go his way. "Wendell Pike," he said and put out a hand. Dalton stood up and took it. The grip was warm and dry and lasted exactly the right amount of time. "Dalton Reeves, I know it." Pike looked out over the rows of open bags on the asphalt, and his eyes moved across them in a way that was not casual at all, and Dalton clocked it. "Lot 14 out of Bangor. You bought it this morning at 900, and Raina posted the disposition at 940, and I've been in the truck ever since. That's a long drive for luggage." "It is," Pike smiled. "I'll be straight with you, Mr. Reeves, because I don't think you're a man who enjoys the dance. That lot was supposed to come to me. I hold the standing contract on unclaimed freight out of Bangor, 6 years running. Raina knows it, the terminal knows it, and somebody in accounting released lot 14 to open auction because a renewal date got missed by 4 days. Sounds like a paperwork problem." "It is exactly a paperwork problem." Pike put his hands in his coat pockets. "I'd like to buy it back. All of it as it sits. 1,500 cash right now, and I'll load it myself, and you keep the 600 profit for 4 hours of work. That's a better day than either of us usually has." And there it was. Dalton stood very still and let the numbers do what numbers do. $1,500 was propane through February. It was tires. It was a real motel room and a shower with a door on it. It was measured against his actual circumstances, a genuinely enormous amount of money. And Wendell Pike had driven 90 minutes and offered a 66% premium sight unseen on a lot that contained 42 pairs of black socks. "How'd you know what I paid?" Dalton said. "Raina posts dispositions. How'd you know I was here?" Pike's smile didn't change by a millimeter, and that right there was the thing that decided it. "Small state," he said. "Sure." Dalton nodded slowly. "I'm going to pass." For the first time, something moved behind Pike's eyes. Not anger, not even surprise, really. Something closer to recalculation, the small internal adjustment of a man who had budgeted for one outcome and was now revising. "Can I ask why?" "See, because you didn't ask what's in it." The pier was quiet for a second. "A man buys back a lot he never saw," Dalton said. "He asks what's in it every single time, unless he already knows." Pike looked at him for a long moment. Then he laughed genuinely warmly with his whole chest, and Dalton disliked him more in that instant than he had in the entire preceding conversation. "You're careful," Pike said. "That's not a criticism. Careful men make good customers eventually." He pulled a card from an inside pocket and held it out, and when Dalton didn't take it, he set it on the corner of the tailgate and weighted it with a stone. "Numbers on there. Offer holds through the weekend. After that, the contract renews, and it stops being my problem. And honestly, Mr. Reeves, I'd rather it stayed my problem." "Why's that?" "Because I'm easy to deal with," Pike said pleasantly, and walked back to his truck. Ronan watched him the entire way, head low, silent. The diesel started and pulled off the pier, and Dalton stood there with a $900 mistake spread out on the asphalt around him, and a dead man's dog tags in his jacket pocket, and understood that he had just been offered $1,500 by a man who had known there was something in that truck worth burying. He went back in and he tore the duffel apart. Not carelessly, carefully, the way he'd been trained, working a systematic search on a soft-sided container. Outer pockets first, then contents item by item laid in a line. Then the empty bag itself, seams, base liner, hardware. The liner had a lump. It was on the inside of the false bottom, under the reinforcing panel, and he'd never have found it by looking. He found it by running his palm flat across the panel and feeling a 2-millimeter rise 3 inches long that had no business being there. He got his knife out and made a cut along the stitch line 4 inches and reached in. An envelope. Standard business-size cream softened at the corners the way paper goes when it's been carried against the body. Not sealed with glue, the flap had been tucked, opened, and tucked again more than once. Somebody had read this and put it back and read it again. On the front, in blue ballpoint, one word. Junie Dalton looked at it for a long time. I knew the name. Of course he knew the name. Owen Keller had carried a photograph of a red-headed toddler in the map pocket of his kit for 2 deployments and had shown it to anyone who slowed down. Junie Bug. She's going to be smarter than both of us and meaner than either. She would be 9 years old now. Dalton did not open the envelope. He wanted to. His thumb was already on the flap, and he had to physically remove his hand and set the envelope on his knee, because opening it was the exact kind of decision that felt small and wasn't. That letter had a name on it, and the name wasn't his. Not mine, he said out loud to nobody. Ronan's ears came forward. I know, Dalton said. I know, but it's not mine. He set it in his inside jacket pocket against his chest and buttoned the flap down over it. He almost missed the tag. He had the duffel upside down, shaking it out over the truck floor when something stiff slid out of the outer side pocket and skated across the metal. He picked it up, assuming it was a receipt. It was a baggage claim stub. The adhesive strip, type the kind that wraps a handle creased where it had been peeled off and folded, but intact. Airline code, routing, a 13-digit reference number, and in the corner, the date of acceptance printed by machine. Dalton read the date. Then he read it again because his brain had rejected it and handed it back for a second pass. He got out his phone, 12% battery. He opened the Notes app where he kept the things he never looked at and scrolled down past everything and found the entry he had put there 4 years ago at 3 in the morning in a parking lot in Bath because he'd been unable to sleep and had wanted the date written somewhere outside his own head. O. Keller, DOD 14 OCT. He looked at the claim stub. He looked at the note. The bag had been accepted into a commercial baggage system on a date 3 years and 2 months after the United States Navy had declared Owen Keller dead and put a folded flag into his sister's hands. Dalton stood up so fast he cracked his shoulder on the truck's ceiling rail and didn't feel it. No, he said. He put both hands on the wall of the truck and leaned into it, and his heart was going hard, and he made himself do what he had made himself do 100 times in rooms where being wrong got people killed. He made himself argue against it. The stub could be from a different bag. No, it came out of the side pocket. It's creased to this bag's handle radius. Somebody else could have shipped his gear later. Then why pick out the name tape? You don't pick out a name tape on gear you are returning to a family. You pick it out because you don't want the bag traceable. Effects get shipped years late all the time, not through commercial baggage. Effects move through the casualty assistance system. They move on a manifest with a signature at every handoff, and they get delivered. They do not get checked at a counter like a suitcase and then abandoned. Somebody stole the bag and dumped it. Then the folded clothes would be disturbed. Then the tags wouldn't still be inside. Nobody steals a duffel, keeps the dog tags, folds the shirts, and hides a letter in the false bottom. Every single door closed. And what was left standing in the middle of the room unmoved was the thing he had refused to think for 11 years. The casket had been too light. Ronan, Dalton said. The dog was standing in the truck doorway. And now, only now, with the tags in his pocket and the letter against his chest and the claim stub shaking slightly in his hand, Dalton actually looked at his dog. Looked at him the way you look at a piece of evidence instead of a companion. 4 feet from the door, 2 hours and 40 minutes without moving. Locked on one bag out of 140 through a steel wall before the door had even been fully open. That is not a dog smelling a smell. Dogs alert on trained targets. Explosives, narcotics. Human remains a specific scent article they've been given in the last 10 minutes. A dog does not sit and lock on an unfamiliar container because it smells interesting. A dog does that when he recognizes something. You know that bag, Dalton said. His voice had gone strange and thin. Don't you? Ronan came forward across the truck floor and sat down against Dalton's leg and pressed the whole weight of his shoulder in hard, the way he did in bad hours in the truck bed at 3 in the morning. Dalton put his hand on the back of the dog's neck and felt under his fingers a smooth strip of scar tissue where no coat grew. A wound that had been stitched by somebody who knew exactly what they were doing. 4 years ago, a folder had come over with no handler history in it, And a coordinator had said sometimes the files just don't follow. And Dalton Reeves had been too broken at the time to ask a single question about it. He sat down on the floor of the truck and with his back against the wall and his dog against his ribs. And for the first time in 6 years, the machinery in his chest that he had spent so long shutting down came fully terribly online. Somewhere out there was a 9-year-old girl who had grown up under her father's name like it was a debt. Somewhere out there was a man in a canvas coat who had driven 90 minutes to buy a truckload of garbage without asking what was in it. And somewhere in an office in a file in a 2-paragraph finding that 31 families had been handed and told to accept was a sentence that said, Owen Keller had gotten 4 men killed. Dalton looked at the pays in his palm, face-to-face wrapped 4 times folded at the end, so a man could peel them with his thumbnail in the dark and hear nothing at all. He'd spent 11 years believing Owen Keller had been buried by the enemy. He had been buried by his own. He returned the box truck 11 minutes late and paid the fee without arguing, because arguing would mean a conversation and he had nothing left to spend on conversations. Then he drove to Bangor. The freight terminal annex didn't open until 9. He got there at 6:40 and sat in the cab with the engine off and the D on the passenger seat and the claim stub flattened against his thigh, and he did the only thing he could do with 4 hours and no leverage. He built the question, not the emotional question. The emotional question was, is Owen Keller alive? And that question was useless because there was no door in the world you could knock on and ask it. The operational question was smaller and harder and had an actual address. How did a bag get into a commercial baggage system with a name picked off it and stay there long enough to be sold as garbage? Because a bag doesn't wander. A bag has a number, and a number has a log. At Niniosh 4, he was standing at Reina Ocasio's counter with the stub in his hand. Lot 14, she said without looking up. You want a refund? I told you as is means. I don't want a refund. That got her to look up. I want to know where one bag came from. Reina's face did a thing he'd seen before in people who work inside systems. A fast internal check, is this going to cost me anything? And then the small relaxation when the answer came back, no. Okay, that I can maybe do. Stub. He handed it over. She typed. It took 11 seconds and he counted every one. Huh, she said. Huh, what? So, she turned the monitor about a third of the way toward him, which was as much regulation as she was willing to break. Your bag was accepted at Boston. Check through to Bangor connecting. Never claimed at Bangor. Goes into the 90-day hold. 90 days expire, it drops into disposition. Disposition goes to auction. She tapped the screen. Standard. Boring. That's like 4,000 bags a year. Then why'd you say, huh? Reina hesitated. Because there's no passenger. The room got very quiet inside Dalton's head. Say that again. There's no passenger record attached. She scrolled. See, normally a check bag hangs off a PNRA reservation. Name, ticket, number, seat. When a bag goes unclaimed, we send 3 notices to the passenger and then we're clear to sell it. That's the whole legal basis for the auction. But this one, she scrolled back, then forward again. This one's got a bag tag and a routing and no reservation. Which shouldn't be possible because the tag gets printed off the reservation. So somebody printed a tag without a passenger. Somebody with counter access could sure, or a handler at the sort belt with a portable printer in theory. She made a face. But why, what do you gain? You'd be checking a bag to nowhere. You'd gain 90 days in an auction, Dalton said. Reina looked at him. You'd gain, he said, a legal way to make a bag stop existing. Okay, she laughed and it died halfway. That's a weird thing to say out loud in a freight terminal at 9 in the morning. Can you print me that record? No, Reina. I like this job. But she was already pulling a sticky note. She wrote the 13-digit number, the acceptance date, and the word Boston, and pushed it across the counter and immediately turned the monitor away as if putting the screen back was the same as not having shown him. Dalton picked it up. One more thing, and she said, and I'm saying this because you seem like, look, somebody already asked about lot 14. He went still. Went yesterday afternoon after you bought it. Wendell called. Pike called you. He calls me all the time. He's got the contract. Reina, did he ask about the lot or did he ask about a bag? She stopped. He watched her replay it. He watched her get to the end of the replay and not like where it landed. He asked, she said slowly, whether the lot had anything in it that came off a military manifest. Dalton put both hands on the counter. And I said no, because there's nothing on a manifest in unclaimed. And he said, you're sure it all went to Reeves? Her voice had changed. He used your name. I never told him your name. I was on 1A South by 9:30 with the sticky note on the dash and his hands too tight on the wheel. The math had turned over. 12 hours ago, he'd had a dead man's dog tags and a bad feeling. Now he had a bag that had been inserted into a system rather than lost by it, and a salvage contractor who had known his name before anyone said it, which meant this wasn't 11 years old and buried. It was current. Somebody had been maintaining this. He stopped at a gas station outside Bucksport, put $9 in the tank because $9 was the shape of his life now, and sat in the lot with the envelope out of his jacket. Junie. Ronan watched him from the passenger seat. Don't look at me like that. The dog didn't stop. It's got her name on it. Dalton turned it over and over again. 11 years, and the one thing the man left behind has her name on it. I opened that I'm taking the last thing he ever did and making it about me. He put it back in his pocket. He got out and put the phone number for the Rockland Fish Co-op into his phone from the pay and park sign he'd photographed a year ago, and called and got a receptionist and asked for Delia Keller in accounting. It rang 4 times. Delia. Dalton's mouth went dry. He had rehearsed nothing. This is Dalton Reeves from the pier. A pause. The luggage guy. Yeah. You need something. I need 20 minutes, he said, in person. And I need you to not hang up when I tell you what it's about. That's a hell of an opener. It's about your brother. The silence on the other end lasted so long that he pulled the phone away from his ear to check the call was still connected. Don't call this number again, Delia said and hung up. Sobbed. I went anyway. He got the address the way anybody gets an address in a town of 7,000. He asked the woman at the hardware store where the Kellers lived, and she told him, and then she said, you're the fellow with the shepherd, and he said, yes, ma'am, and left. The house was on a side street 2 blocks up from the harbor. He parked across the road and sat there for 6 full minutes because he understood exactly what he was about to do to a woman who had spent 11 years building a life on top of a closed door. Then he got out. She opened before he knocked. She'd been watching him from the window. I told you not to come. You told me not to call. Don't be clever. Delia Keller had her arms crossed and her jaw set, and she was not a large woman, but she was standing in that doorway like a hull plate. Whatever this is, reporter podcast, one of those YouTube people, the books I have heard all of it, 19 times. My brother killed 4 men, and every couple years, somebody decides that's interesting. I carried his casket. She stopped. 3rd position, left shoulder, Dalton said. October 11 years ago. It was raining in the morning and it quit by the time we got to the site. You wore your mother's coat. It was too big in the shoulders, and when they handed you the flag, you didn't cry. You said thank you to the officer twice. Delia's arms came down slowly. Who are you, she said. Dalton Reeves. I was Owen's team leader for 2 deployments. Reeves, her voice cracked on it. You're Reeves. He wrote about you. He wrote, she stopped herself hard and the shutter came back down. You didn't come to the memorial service. The 5-year one. No. Why? Because I didn't believe the finding, Dalton said, and I wasn't going to stand in a room full of people and say nothing. Then you should have said something, Delia said, and it came out of her like something with teeth. Do you have any idea 19 guys were on that up, and 31 families got that letter, and not one of you ever picked up a phone? Not one. My brother's name is a punchline in a Navy safety briefing. They teach him as a mistake. I know. You don't know. You're right, he said. I don't. That landed differently than a defense would have. She looked at him for a second, and some of the fight went out of her posture, replaced by something more tired and more dangerous. What do you want? 20 minutes. Give me one reason. Dalton took the dog tags out of his pocket and held them up on their chain, still wrapped the tape folded back at the end where his thumbnail had lifted it. Delia Keller looked at them, and then she made a sound he would think about for a long time afterward. Not a scream, nothing that loud. A short intake like a woman stepping into cold water. Where did you get those? She said. I bought them, Dalton said, for $900 in a truckload of abandoned bags. The kitchen table had a wobble, and she put a folded receipt under the leg without thinking about it, which told him she did it 4 times a day. She wouldn't touch the tags. She let him set them on the table and she looked at them from 18 inches away, with her hands flat on her own knees. They gave us tags, she said, at the funeral, in a bag with his watch and a St. Christopher. That's what you get. So either those are fake or you got a set that came out of a supply drawer, Dalton said. She looked up sharply. Because those, he nodded at the table, are his working set. Nobody deploys with one pair. And a man doesn't leave his working set in a bag by accident. He leaves it because he's done being that man. Stop, Delia. You do not get to come into my kitchen and say the things, she said, and her voice was shaking now all the way through. Do you understand me? Do you understand what it does to a person to be told a story? Because I've had two. I had the one where he was a hero and it lasted 6 days, and then I had the one where he killed 4 men, and I have lived in the second one for 11 years. I have made a life in there. I have a bop and a house and a kid I'm raising, and I am not doing a third story. I'm not selling you a story. I'm telling you what's on a piece of paper. He put the claim stub on the table next to the tags. That bag was checked into a Boston airport 3 years and 2 months after the funeral. There's no passenger attached to it, no reservation, no name, nothing. Somebody printed a tag off, no ticket, put a duffel on a belt, and sent it to Bangor, where nobody picked it up. And 90 days later, the law says the airline gets to sell it. Delia stared at the stub. That's the whole trick, Dalton said. You don't burn something. Burning leaves ash, and ash gets investigated. You check it as luggage. It goes into a system that is designed from top to bottom to legally dispose of things nobody claims. That's insane. It's clean, he said. It's the cleanest thing I've ever seen. She didn't answer. And yesterday, he said, a man named Wendell Pike drove 90 minutes to buy that lot off me for $1,500 without asking what was in it, and he knew my name before anybody said it. Delia's head came up. You know that name. Everybody knows that name, she said slowly. Pike Salvage. They're a company, Dalton. They haul scrap out of the boatyards. They take the co-op's dead gear twice a year. Wendell's been at the same Rotary breakfast for 20 years. That's what makes it work. You are describing, she said, a conspiracy run through a baggage carousel by a man I have watched eat pancakes. And behind them a voice said, whose dog is that? Dalton turned. The girl in the hallway was 9 years old and had a book held against her chest with one arm, and had clearly been standing there for a while, and she was not looking at Dalton at all. She was looking at Ronan, who had come to the screen door and sat down on the outside of it. Junie, Delia said, go upstairs. You said I could have the kitchen at 4. It's not 4. It's 4:10, Junie said. Delia closed her eyes. Dalton got a hand over the tags on the table, not fast, just a hand, set down flat, but he was a half-second late, and he knew it, and the girl's eyes had already come off the dog. Those are dog tags, she said. Junie? They're the taped kind. Everything in the room stopped. Delia's hand froze on the back of her chair. Dalton did not move his palm, and Junie Keller walked to the table with the flat, unafraid interest of a child who has not yet learned that adults break, and looked down at the edge of black tape showing under a stranger's hand. My dad taped his, she said, sandwich way, front to front. Dalton heard his own heartbeat. Who told you that? He said. He did. Junie, Delia said, and her voice had gone thin. Baby, you were 2. I know. The girl shrugged, unbothered. But he told me, he said he taped them so they wouldn't sing. She looked at Dalton directly for the first time. Because if they sing, somebody hears you. Dalton's vision went strange at the edges. When did he tell you that? He said very carefully. I don't remember when. Do you remember where? On the phone, Junie said. Kind of. It's a really old one. Aunt Dee says I made it up. And Delia Keller sat down in a kitchen chair like her legs had been taken out from under her. Dalton got them both to the table. He didn't ask permission. Delia, look at me. She was 2. I know. She made it up. Kids do that. They make up the parent. They build them out of pictures. Delia. He put his hand flat on the table between them. 2-year-olds don't invent tradecraft. She stopped breathing. Every operator silences his tags, he said. Every one. But the method is personal. Owen sandwiched them face to face and wrapped 4 turns and folded the tail so he could peel it one-handed in the dark. I watched him do it 100 times. It is not in a manual. It is not on the internet. It is not in a photograph, because when it's done right, you can't see anything but a black brick. Junie was watching him with her chin on her fist. So there are exactly two ways your niece knows that, Dalton said. Either she was in a room with him after she was old enough to form memory. Delia's mouth moved. Nothing came out. Or he told her. He's dead. Then who taped these? Dalton said and lifted his hand off the tags. And Delia Keller, who had not cried at a funeral, who had said thank you twice to an officer who had built a life inside the worst version of the story and defended it at her own front door 40 minutes ago, put both hands over her face and broke apart at her own kitchen table. Junie got up, went around and put her arms around her aunt's shoulders. She didn't say anything. She'd clearly done it before. Dalton looked away out at his dog on the other side of the screen door. Ronan was standing, facing the road. The truck was in the driveway with a plate Dalton didn't get because it backed out and left before he made the porch. Ronan's growl started low and stayed low, which was worse. Was that Pike? Delia said behind him. No, Dalton watched the corner. Pike knocks. He came back inside and shut the door and for the first time actually locked it, and Delia noticed him do it and didn't object, and that small non-objection was how he knew she'd crossed over. Okay, she said. Her voice was ruined, but it was working. Okay, what do you need? I need to open the envelope. He put it on the table. Delia looked at the single word in blue ballpoint and made a small sound. It's addressed to her, Dalton said. It's not mine and it's not yours. I've had it for a day and I haven't touched it, and I'd like you to be the one to decide. Why? Because I've already made the mistake of deciding what a Keller gets told, he said. 11 years ago, I'm not doing it twice. Delia looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, Junie, come here. No. Delia wiped her face with the heel of her hand. No, we're not doing that in this house. She's 9, not stupid, and I'm done managing her. She looked at her niece. Baby, there's a letter from your dad. Junie went very, very still. Is it real? I think so. Okay, Junie said and sat down. The letter was 2 pages, both sides written small. Delia read it out loud because Junie asked her to, and her voice held for the first paragraph and then stopped holding, and she read the rest of it anyway. Junie Bug, if somebody hands you this and I'm not standing there, then it went the way I thought it might, and I'm sorry because I promised you I'd stop making promises like that. I need you to know I did not die on the 14th of October. I need you to know that whatever they told you about that night is a thing somebody wrote down on purpose. I'm not saying that to be dramatic. I'm saying it because you're going to grow up with people looking at you a certain way, and I need you to have something to hold against it. Here is the true part, as short as I can make it. We were sent to take a ship. What was on it was ours American off the books moving out. We got there before the people who were supposed to clean it up, and 4 of my friends died in that compartment, and it was not because of a number I said wrong. I never said a wrong number. I have thought about it every day since, and I never said a wrong number. I came out of the water and I understood that there was no version where I stand up and say this and you stay safe. As long as I'm dead, I'm a story. The second I'm alive, I'm a witness, and a witness has a daughter. So I stayed dead. I've been sorry about it every single day, and I do it again. Bug, you have to understand, I'm not asking you to be proud of me. I'm asking you to know the difference between a man who ran and a man who couldn't come home. They look the same from where you're standing. They're not the same. In this bag is the key and the number. Give them to somebody who was there, not the Navy, somebody who was there. I love you more than I know how to write. Delia stopped. Nobody said anything for a while. Then Junie said in a completely level voice, so he's not dead. Baby. He wrote, I'm not asking you to be proud of me, Junie said. You don't write that if you're going to be dead in an hour. You write that if you're going to have to keep doing it. Delia looked at Dalton over the girl's head with an expression of absolute helplessness. She's right, Dalton said quietly. The key and the number. He turned the envelope over and shook it, and a small brass key fell onto the table with a flat little tick, and after it, a strip of paper with 9 digits on it. The key was the kind that opens a padlock on a shed. Wear on the shoulder a lot of it. The number was not a phone number and not coordinates, and it took him 90 seconds to see it, and when he did, his skin went cold from the neck down. That's an IMO, he said. A what? International Maritime Organization number. He was already standing. Every commercial hull on Earth gets one. It's permanent. You can rename a ship, reflag it, repaint it, sell it 11 times the IMO stays. It's the one number a vessel can't shake. Delia was on her phone. It's not, there's no lookup, it just says, she turned the screen around. MV Kestrel Bay, built 2004, general cargo, status broken up 2015. Dalton read it twice. That's the ship, he said. What ship? That's the ship we boarded. Delia stared at him. Slack water, Dalton said. That's the hull. And that record says it was scrapped in 2015. And I can tell you for a fact the after action said it went down during the engagement in 2014. So which is it? Neither, Dalton said. That's the point. A ship that sinks has a wreck. A ship that gets broken up has a scrapyard, a buyer, a demolition certificate. You know what a ship that has two different disposal stories has? What? A ship somebody's still using. I was reaching for his coat when Ronan got up off the porch and went down the steps. Not fast, not toward the road. Dalton opened the door. Ronan, here. The dog looked back at him and then kept walking out to the end of the driveway and stopped and turned left toward the harbor and looked down the hill with his whole body pointed like a hand. Dalton had seen that exactly once before at a fish pier, 4 feet from a cargo door. Delia. His voice had changed. What's down that road? She came out onto this porch. Nothing. Owl's Head. Boatyards. Which boatyards? The dead one. She was frowning. The old Crockett yard. They haven't hauled anything out in years. It's where hulls go to sit. Dalton went down the steps. Dalton, get the key. She caught up with him at the truck with the brass key in her fist and Junie behind her, and Dalton said no. And Delia said, she's coming. We're past that. And he looked at the 9-year-old, and the 9-year-old looked back and did not blink, and he lost that one in under 2 seconds. They drove down with the chase standing on the seat. The yard had 11 hulls up on cradles and blocks, most of them stripped to gray wood and rust, and Dalton didn't have to search a single one. Ronan went out the door before the truck fully stopped. He ran 40 yards past hull after hull without slowing, without casting, without a single check. A straight line, the way a dog runs when he is not searching but returning, and he stopped at a 42-foot lobster boat on stern blocks, with her paint gone chalk and her registration numbers peeled. And he put his front paws on the cradle, and he barked once and then sat down and would not move. Delia made a noise behind Dalton. He looked up at the transom. The letters were faded almost to nothing, but somebody had once painted them by hand, and hand-painted letters don't fully leave. Junie B., and beside him a 9-year-old girl said in the smallest voice she had used all day, "That's my name." Dalton stood in a dead boatyard with a brass key in his hand and 11 years of silence coming apart around him, and understood that the man he had buried had been close enough all this time to paint a boat. They didn't go home. Dalton put them in a motel in Thomaston under his own name and paid cash for 4 nights, and when Delia asked why his name and not hers, he said, "Because they already have mine." And she stopped asking. By 7 that morning, she had her laptop open on the bed with the ledger propped against the headboard and a legal pad on her knee, and she did not look up for 6 hours. Dalton had spent 11 years believing that if the truth about Slackwater ever came out, it would come out the way it does in the movies, a confession, a raised voice, somebody breaking in a room. He watched a 38-year-old accountant in a motel with a cup of gas station coffee take that idea apart with a pen. "Okay," she said around 1 in the afternoon. "Come here. Sit." He sat. "This is the ledger," she said. "Fuel taken on. Hull port date tonnage 2 signatures. This is the only thing we have that somebody actually wrote down at the time without thinking about it." She turned the laptop. "And this is the voyage record. It's public. Anybody can buy it. It's what the ship declared. And they don't match." She said it the way a person says the sky is blue. "Dalton, they don't match in 11 places. Not close. Not a rounding thing. Here Cape Alder 16 months ago. Declared port rotation is Cartagena to Algeciras. That's the filing. That's what her agent submitted. That's what her class society has. That's what her insurer has. And the ledger. The ledger says she took on 980 metric tons of fuel in Portsmouth, New Hampshire on a Tuesday from a barge called Marrow 3, signed by a chief engineer whose name I can pull off her crew list." Delia set the pen down. "A ship cannot be in Algeciras and Portsmouth on the same Tuesday. That's not an interpretation. That's not testimony. That's a boat being in a place. Dalton looked at the two columns. That's it, he said. That's the whole thing. That's the whole thing, Delia said. That's how every single one of them goes down. Not the crime. The bookkeeping around the crime. She flipped the legal pad around and there were 11 lines on it, and each line had a date and two place names and a tonnage. 11 times in 6 years, she said. That hull was on the east coast of the United States taking on fuel under a false declared voyage. And every one of those calls is within 40 miles of a defense logistics facility. Dalton sat back. They're not moving it out of a theater, he said. No, they're moving it out of here. That's what the numbers say, Delia said. And Dalton, I want to be careful because I do this for a living, and I know what happens when somebody wants a number to mean something. This doesn't prove what's in the crates. It doesn't prove Vaughn knew. It proves a ship lied about where she was 11 times over 6 years, and that the ship the Navy says it sank in 2014 has been buying fuel in New Hampshire. Is that enough? It's enough to make somebody have to explain, she said. That's all evidence ever is. Ray Sutter was a harder door. Dalton found him at a boat shop in Owl's Head, working alone on a skiff that was never going to float again. And Sutter looked up and knew him immediately and put the sander down and walked to the back of the shop. Ray? Nope. I know what you want. Sutter had his back to him. His hands were on the bench and they were not steady. I've known what you want since I saw you on the pier 3 days ago and turned around and left. You think I didn't recognize you? I recognized you from 150 yards. Then you know why I'm here. You're here about the statement. Dalton didn't say anything. You want me to say I lied? Sutter turned around. He was 50 and looked 65. So say it. Go ahead and say it out loud so it's in the room because I've been saying it in my own head for 11 years, and I'd like to hear how it sounds in somebody else's mouth. You signed a statement that Owen Keller called the wrong compartment. Yes, I did. Did he? No, Sutter said. He didn't. He said it twice and he said it right, and I heard it in my ear both times. Dalton had prepared himself for a fight for a denial, for a man clawing at the walls. He had not prepared himself for a man who put it down on the table in 9 seconds, like he'd had it in his pocket the whole time. Then why? Because a lieutenant commander I had never met came to my house, Sutter said, with a folder about my son. Dalton's jaw locked. Cody was 4. He's got a metabolic thing. He's had it since birth. Sutter waved a hand impatient at his own throat closing. It doesn't matter what it is. It matters that it cost $11,000 a month and that every dollar of it ran through TRICARE. And that this man sat on my couch and talked about how complicated administrative separations can get. He never threatened me. Not one time. He was sympathetic. He brought up the finding like it was a piece of weather, and he said something like, the review's going to land where it lands, but people who make it complicated tend to have complicated years. And you signed. I signed a statement that said I couldn't confirm the compartment call, Sutter said. That's what it actually said. I never wrote that Owen got it wrong. I wrote that I couldn't confirm. And then the finding came out and couldn't confirm had turned into the load-bearing wall of the whole thing, and I understood that I'd been used, and I got very quietly drunk for about 9 years. He looked at the floor. Cody's 15 now. He's fine. He plays trombone badly. Sutter laughed, and it was a terrible sum. So I sold a man's name for a kid who was going to be fine anyway. That's the arithmetic. I look at it every day. Ray, don't. Ray, I need to know if you kept anything. And Sutter stopped. He stood there for a long moment with his hands hanging. Come here, he said. I went to a steel cabinet, unlocked the bottom drawer, moved a box of sanding discs, and came out with a foam-lined case the size of a paperback. Inside was a handheld GPS unit, the ruggedized kind, and a spare memory card in a sleeve. Personal, Sutter said. We weren't supposed to carry them. Everybody did. Mine ran the whole op. Track, log timestamps, every waypoint I hit from the rail to the compartment. He put it down. I got off that ship and I sat in the back of the helo and I looked at that thing and I understood I was holding the only version of the night that couldn't be edited. Because it's mine. It's not on a network. Nobody signed it. Nobody can amend it. You've had this for 11 years. I've had it for 11 years. Why didn't you? Because I'm a coward, Sutter said, and it came out of him like a bone breaking. Say it plain. I'm not a tragic man. I'm not conflicted. I was scared and I stayed scared and I let a dead guy hold it. And every year it got harder because the longer you sit on it, the more the sitting itself becomes the crime. Dalton picked up the case. He's not dead, he said. Ray Sutter's face did something Dalton would remember for the rest of his life. What Owen Keller is alive, Dalton said, or he was 2 years ago. I've got a photograph. Sutter put a hand out and caught the edge of the bench. You're lying. I'm not. You're lying, Sutter said, and then he sat down on an overturned bucket and put both hands over his head, and he did not cry. He just made a low sound like something being pulled out of him. 11 years. 11 years I've been sorry to a headstone. Dalton crouched in front of him. Ray, I'll say it, Sutter said muffled. Whatever it is, a deposition, a hearing, I don't care. I'll say it in front of my son. I'll say it in front of God. Just tell me where. Wendell Pike didn't run, and that was somehow worse. Dalton went to the salvage yard office on a Thursday morning with the dog in the truck and no plan beyond a door. And Pike looked up from a desk covered in bills of lading and said, I wondered how long. Boatyard burned. I heard. Did you do it? No, Pike said, but somebody I've done business with did, and I'd have a hard time explaining the difference to a jury, so let's not pretend there is one. Dalton stood there. Sit down, Mr. Reeves. I'll stand. Suit yourself. Pike laced his hands on the desk. You want to know what I am, I will spoil my. You've been walking around for a week building me into something. Let me save you the trouble because whatever you've built is more interesting than the truth. Go ahead. I'm a disposal service, Pike said. He said it the way a man tells you he's in insurance. 22 years I've held unclaimed freight contracts out of 2 airports and 4 port facilities. That's a legitimate business, and it's a small one, and it feeds 9 families. About 9 years ago, a man came to me and asked whether I'd be willing to accept the occasional item into the stream that hadn't gone through the normal channel. Pike shrugged. That's it. That's the whole arrangement. Somebody hands me a bag or a crate, I put a tag on it, it goes into the 90-day hold, and 90 days later the law says it's mine to sell. And I sell it or I don't, and it goes to the crusher and it's gone. Legally, on paper, forever. You laundered evidence through a baggage carousel. I made things unclaimed, Pike said. There's a difference, and the difference is that everything I did is documented and lawful and would survive an audit, which is precisely why they use me instead of a man with a shovel. Dalton felt his hands opening and closing. Do you know what was in them? I never opened a single one. Pike met his eyes. Not one in 9 years. That's not squeamishness, Mr. Reeves, that's product. The moment I know what's in the bag, I'm a conspirator. As long as I don't, I'm a contractor with a clean process and a bad client list. That's a rationalization. It's a legal position, Pike said, and I've had it reviewed, and it's a good one, and I'll tell you honestly, it's going to keep me out of prison, and it is not going to keep me out of hell, and I've made my peace with the split. Dalton put both hands on the desk. Lot 14, he said. You knew what was in it. I knew a bag was in it, Pike said. I got a call at 8 in the morning telling me an item had gone out to open auction because a renewal date got missed by 4 days and to get it back, and I got in my truck. For the first time, something moved in his face. And I want you to understand something because you keep looking at me like I outsmarted you. I offered you $1,500. I stood on that pier and looked at a man living out of a truck and offered him $600 of profit for 4 hours of work, and he said no. You knew my name before anyone said it. I was told your name on the phone, Pike said, by the same voice that told me to get the bag. And I want to be very clear with you that I don't know that voice's name either. 9 years. It's always a phone. It's always polite. He opened a drawer and took out a spiral notebook, worn soft, and set it on the desk and pushed it across. Dalton didn't touch it. What is that? Every item, Pike said. Date received from whom in person, tag number, terminal, disposition. 9 years, 206 entries. Why would you keep that? Because I'm 64 years old and I'm not stupid, Pike said. You don't take work from people like that without keeping a book. That book is the only reason I've slept since 2017. Dalton picked it up. Why give it to me? Because the boatyard burnt, Pike said, and his voice finally slightly changed. Bags I can do. Bags are nothing. Bags are cloth. They set fire to 11 holes in a town I've lived in my whole life, and it went in the paper as a wiring fault. And my granddaughter's school is 400 yards from that yard. He looked at his own hands. I've been telling myself for 9 years that I was a process, he said. Turns out a process burns things. Curtis Vaughn asked for the meeting. That was the part Dalton would never fully get over. He didn't have to be found. 4 days after the fire, Delia's cell rang from a Portland number, and a woman said she was calling on behalf of Mr. Vaughn and would Mr. Reeves be available for lunch. They gave him a restaurant on the Portland waterfront. 12:30, Wednesday. It's a trap, Delia said. It's a restaurant at noon on a Wednesday. It's the opposite of a trap. Dalton. He's not going to do anything to me, Dalton said. That's the whole point of Curtis Vaughn. He's never done anything to anybody. Vaughn was already seated, 68 gray in a soft jacket with no tie, and he stood up and put out his hand and said, Chief, it's been a long time. And Dalton shook it because not shaking it would have been the only theatrical thing in the room. You look well, Vaughn said. I live in a truck. I know. Vaughn sat. I'd like to talk about that too if we get there. The waitress came. Vaughn ordered a chowder. Dalton ordered nothing and Vaughn didn't push. I'll be direct, Vaughn said. Because I think you've earned direct and because I don't have any interest in the dance. You have a ledger. You have a recording. You have a photograph of a man who ought to be dead, and I'd guess by now you've been to see Ray Sutter, and I'd guess Wendell Pike gave you a notebook because Wendell has always kept a notebook and everyone has always known it. Dalton said nothing. Here's what I can do. Vaughn unfolded his napkin. The finding on Petty Officer Keller can be reopened. That's not a favor, that's a process, a records correction board, a substantiated request, and there are people who would move it. Within 18 months, the transposition finding is vacated, the record is corrected, the family gets a letter over a signature, and the 4 families get an amended narrative. The name comes off the safety curriculum. It goes back to a clean line. And the ledger goes to me. Dalton put his hands in his lap so they weren't on the table. You're offering to give a man his name back, he said, if I hand you the thing that took it. I'm offering to correct a record, Vaughn said. You're describing it in a way that makes you feel better about turning it down, which I understand. 4 men died. 4 men died. Vaughn agreed and did not blink and did not raise his voice, and this was the moment Dalton understood he was not going to get anything out of this man ever, not in a restaurant, not in a courtroom, not in a jail cell. Ellis Boyd Kaminsky Fuentes. I have written to all 4 of those families every October for 11 years, and I have never once received a reply, and I don't expect one. You sent us onto that ship. I approved an interdiction package built on the intelligence in front of me. That's not an answer. It's the only answer that exists, Vaughn said. Chief, may I say something you're going to hate? You're going to anyway. There isn't a villain. Vaughn set his spoon down. I know that's not what you want. You've spent a week building a man, and here I am, and I'm 68, and I have a bad hip, and I'm having chowder. There was a program. It was authorized at a level I was never briefed into, and it was still running 11 years after everybody who authorized it had rotated out because programs don't end. They just stop having anyone who remembers why they started. And on the 14th of October, a team went up the side of a hull 19 minutes early, and 8 men in a compartment made a decision in 3 seconds. And after that, 100 people made small, reasonable, defensible choices, including me, including Ray Sutter, including a doctor who entered an evacuation number wrong. And the sum of those choices is a dead man's daughter growing up in a small town. Don't. You want me to have done it? Vaughn said gently. It would be so much better if I'd done it. Then it's one man and you take him down and it's over. But nobody did it, Chief. It got done. By all of us, a quarter inch at a time over 11 years, and the only person in the entire chain who ever tried to stop it was a man who had to be dead in order to try. Dalton was quiet for a long time. You signed the cargo document, he said. I did. You're the VP of Maritime Operations at the company that moves the hull. I am. Then you're not a bystander to a program. You're the last person still running it. And Curtis Vaughn, for exactly 1 second less than that, a flicker so small Dalton would spend months deciding whether he'd imagined it looked tired. Then it was gone. Take the correction, Chief, he said. It's a good outcome. It's the outcome you actually want, and everything past it is just you needing somebody to be punished. Dalton stood up. His daughter's 9, he said. She knows there was a sandbag in the box. Vaughn Spoon stopped. She's 9 years old, Dalton said, and she sat on a deck 4 days ago and worked out on her own that they buried a bag of sand and made her aunt stand there and thank an officer for it. Twice. He put $2 on the table for a coffee he hadn't ordered. You want to know why I'm not taking the deal? Because you sat there and told me nobody did it. And that kid did more accountability in 9 seconds than the United States Navy has managed in 11 years. The hearing was 6 weeks later in a federal building in Portland before a Senate subcommittee staff panel with 3 members present and 40 empty chairs. It was not dramatic. Dalton had braced for drama and there wasn't any. There was a folding table, a microphone that clipped, and a staff counsel named Ahmadi, who had read every page and asked questions in a bored voice that Dalton eventually understood was not boredom at all, but a kind of surgical calm. Delia went first and spoke for 19 minutes and never raised her voice once. She put up the 11 fuel entries beside the 11 declared voyages. She explained bunker delivery notes to 3 senators the way she'd explain a buy sheet to a fisherman. I want to be clear, she said, that I'm not a maritime expert. I do accounting for a fishing co-op. Anybody in this room could have done what I did. It took 11 days and cost $400 in database access. The only reason nobody did it in 11 years is that nobody looked. Ray Sutter went second. He brought the GPS unit in the foam case and set it on the table, and his hands shook so badly he had to put them flat. I signed a statement in 2015 that said I could not confirm the compartment call, he said. That statement was true in its words, and it was a lie in its purpose. I could confirm it. I heard it twice. Petty Officer Keller said the compartment correctly, and I let 11 years go by. Counsel Ahmadi asked why. Because a man came to my house and talked about my son's insurance, Sutter said, and never once said anything I could write down. Wendell Pike went third and turned over a notebook with 206 entries and a written proffer through his attorney, and he was, in the end, exactly what he'd said. He was a process describing itself unbothered. Dalton went last. He had 4 minutes. He'd written 6 pages and used none of them. He talked for 90 seconds about the manifest, the folded clothes, the picked-out name tape, a baggage claim stub dated 3 years and 2 months after a funeral. He talked for 30 seconds about a dog who wouldn't get in a truck. Then he reached into the pocket of a burnt orange leather jacket and took out 2 dog tags wrapped face-to-face in black electrical tape, and he set them on the table in front of the microphone, and the sound the metal made was very small. Every operator tapes his tags, he said. You tape them so they don't make noise. Because a sound you make yourself is the one that gets you killed. He looked up. That's what this is. Nobody in this story lied under oath. Nobody shredded anything. Every single person in the chain just went quiet at the exact moment where noise would have cost them something, an insurance plan, a contract, a pension, a career. And they all told themselves the same thing I told myself for 11 years, which is somebody else will say it. He put one finger on the tape. 4 men are dead. A 5th man had to bury himself to stay alive. A little girl grew up with her father as a cautionary slide in a safety brief. And the only reason any of you are hearing about it is that a Navy audit missed a contract renewal by 4 days, and a homeless guy with $900 bought the wrong truckload of bags. Nobody said anything. That's not a system working, Dalton said. That's a system that got caught by an accident. And I'd like somebody in this room to sit with how close it came to just not. The hearing adjourned at 4:11 in the afternoon. The referral to the Department of Justice went out in 9 days. The Naval Criminal Investigative Service opened a case in 11. The Board for Correction of Naval Records docketed the Keller file in 3 weeks, which Delia's attorney said was the fastest he had ever seen anything move in 26 years, and which Dalton understood meant only that the correction was the cheapest thing they could give. Iron Veil Maritime Logistics suspended 2 vessels from service pending review. 31 families filed within a month. And it was Junie on a Tuesday at Delia's kitchen table while 3 adults argued about lawyers over her head, who said without looking up from her homework, "Are we going to talk about the postcards?" Everyone stopped. "What postcards?" Delia said. "The birthday ones." Junie kept writing. "I get one every year. There's never anything written on it." Delia put down her pen very slowly. "Baby, those are from the VFW they send." "They're not from the VFW. Junie finally looked up, and she had that flat, unbothered, terrible clarity that had already broken this thing open once. The VFW ones have a flag and a signature. These are just white. Nothing on the front, nothing on the back, different postmark every time. Junie. And there's always a little smudge in the bottom corner, she said. Like crayon, different color every year. It took 4 minutes of testimony to undo what 11 years of paperwork had built. Delia kept them in a shoebox under her bed. She came down with it and set it on the table and didn't open it. And Dalton understood why she had put those cards in that box every year without looking at them, the way you file something you can't throw away and can't examine. There were 7, blank white stock, drugstore quality, no message, no signature, nothing on the front, 7 postmarks, 7 different towns, 7 consecutive Junes. And in the bottom right corner of every single one, a smudge of wax. He colored on them, Junie said. No baby, that's probably just D. The girl put her finger on the first card. It's crayon. I've been coloring since I was 3. I know what crayon looks like. Dalton picked up the earliest one and turned it against the light and saw the waxy drag of it, the way pigment sits on top of coated stock instead of soaking in. She's right. Why would he do that? Delia's voice was climbing. Why not write something? Why send a blank card? Because a blank card isn't a message, Dalton said. There's nothing to intercept. There's nothing to prove. If somebody's watching her mail, all they see is that a 9-year-old gets junk in June. Then what's the point of it? The point is that she gets one, Dalton said. That's the whole point. It's a man saying, I'm still here in the only language nobody can read. He laid all 7 out in order. Delia, write the postmarks. She got a pen. Skowhegan, Waterville, Gardner, Augusta, Winthrop, Hallowell, Augusta again. Dalton looked at the list for about 4 seconds. Then he sat back so hard the chair barked on the floor. What? Delia said. What? They're all the same county. So he's not moving. Dalton put his finger on the list. A man on the run doesn't circle a 40-mile radius for 7 years. He drives 3 hours in a random direction and mails from a town he'll never see again. This isn't evasion. This is somebody who can only get so far from where he lives, and everything on this list is inside a half hour of one place. Delia's mouth opened. Togus, she said. Togus, Dalton said. That's the VA. That's the oldest VA in the country. Blasam. They didn't find him in a week. Dalton had prepared himself for one more locked door and one more key. What he got instead was 18 days of phone calls where nobody could tell him anything because nobody was allowed to, and because for the entire 18 days he was asking the wrong question. He was asking whether a man named Owen Keller was a patient anywhere in the system. And Owen Keller was dead and had been dead for 11 years, and the system was extremely good at knowing that. It was Ray Sutter who turned it. He called on a Sunday morning, and Dalton could hear him breathing wrong. You're asking about a name, Sutter said. Ray, no, listen to me. Listen, I did 4 years as a corpsman before I ever went to selection, and I've been lying awake on this, and you're doing it backwards. His voice cracked. You said he had a skull fracture. You said he was in a coalition facility with a chest tube, and an evac number entered wrong. Dalton, a guy like that doesn't stay a name. If he came home and he couldn't say his name, he doesn't get a file. He gets a number. Dalton stood up out of the truck seat. Say that again. Look for a John Doe, Sutter said. Long-term care, state or federal. Unidentified, no next of kin, traumatic brain injury, nonverbal. That's not a needle in a haystack. There's maybe 100 of those in New England. Somebody's counting them. Dalton was already reaching for his keys. Ray? Yeah. Thank you. Don't. Sutter's voice went to pieces. Don't thank me. Just go get him. It took another 11 days and a lawyer and a records request and a woman named Patrice at a long-term facility in Chelsea, Maine, who finally on a Thursday afternoon said something over the phone that stopped Dalton's heart. I can't give you patient information. I understand. I can't confirm or deny that a specific individual. I understand, ma'am. But, a pause, a long one. Can I ask you a question that isn't about anybody in particular? Yes. You said this person might be nonverbal, traumatic brain injury, no identification. Patrice's voice had changed. Hypothetically, would that person be someone who might, I don't know. Fold things, Dalton stopped breathing. Fold things, he said. Everything, Patrice said. Towels, napkins, his own laundry. Squares corners lined up over and over, and if you unfold it, he does it again. We've got a resident who I'm not saying anything about anyone, but we have a gentleman who's been here going on 4 years, and he folds like it's a job, and every Thursday afternoon, he takes crayons out of the activities bin, and he won't use the markers, only the crayons, and nobody has ever been able to tell me why. Dalton had to put his hand on the roof of the truck. "Ma'am," he said, "what's his intake number?" "John Doe number 4, Patrice said. They drove up on a Thursday. Delia sat in the middle with her hands in her lap for the entire 90 minutes and said maybe 6 words. Junie sat by the window with a folder against her chest and did not say any. Dalton stopped 20 minutes out at a gas station he did not need. "I have to say something," he said, "and I need to say it before we're in the parking lot, not after." Delia looked at him. "It might not be him." "I know." "And if it is him," Dalton said, "he may not know you. He may not know anybody. 4 years nonverbal with a brain injury. Delia, I'm not being careful with you. I'm telling you what's actually likely. There is a real chance we walk into that room and there's a man in a chair and nothing happens at all." "I know." "Do you, Dalton?" Delia's chin came up and it was shaking. "I have buried this man once. I promise you I have already imagined every single way this can hurt." From the window seat without turning around, Junie said, "I'd still want to sit with him." Nobody answered that. Patrice met them at the desk and did not say a word that could be quoted, and walked them down a corridor and stopped outside a day room and said only 20 minutes, "And I'm going to stand right here." Dalton had Ronan on a short lead. "Delia, you first." No, she had gone white. "No, I can't. Delia, I can't do it," she whispered. "Dalton, I can't be the one to look and have it be nothing. I can't. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." So Dalton went in. There were 6 residents in the room, a television nobody was watching, 2 aides, and by the window at a table with a paper cup of crayons and a stack of blank sheets sat a man in his mid-40s. Dalton looked at him for 11 seconds and felt nothing. That was the thing he had not prepared for, not in any version. Not grief, not joy, not certainty. Nothing. The face was wrong. The whole architecture of it was wrong. There'd been 3 surgeries in there at least. The left orbit and the cheek sat differently than the right, and the hairline had a scar running up into it, and the beard was somebody else's beard, and the man's mouth hung slightly open the way it does when the nerve doesn't hold it anymore. Dalton stood there and looked at a stranger. It's not him. He felt the whole thing come apart in his chest. 18 days, 11 years. A boat named after a 9-year-old, a hearing, a sandbag. All of it collapsing into a day room with a television on mute. "Ma'am," he said quietly without turning, "I think we've—" Ronan pulled the lead out of his hand. It was not a lunge. That was what Dalton would say afterward, every time, and nobody ever understood the distinction, and he never stopped trying to explain it. The dog didn't bark, didn't run. He crossed that room at a walk straight, unhurried, without a single check or cast or sniff, the way he'd cross 40 yards of dead boatyard, the way an animal moves when it is not searching for something, but going back to it. He walked to the man at the window, and he put his head down on the man's knee. The man did not look up. His hand came off the table without any hesitation at all, without pausing, without the fumbling search of a person meeting an animal for the first time, and it went to the back of the dog's neck, high right behind the ears, and his fingers dug in and worked twice and stopped and rested. He'd done it 10,000 times. He didn't have to look because his hand knew exactly where the dog would be. The paper cup of crayons went over. Somewhere behind Dalton, an aide said something. Dalton did not hear it because everything in him had gone silent and enormous at once, and he was crossing the room with his legs not entirely under his own authority. And then the man looked up. Not at Dalton, at the dog, and his face, the wrong face, the rebuilt face, the face of a stranger, came apart. He made a sound. It wasn't a word. It wasn't close to a word. It was the sound of a man who had not been permitted to make any sound for 4 years. And it came up out of him raw and broken and loud. And he got both arms around 92 pounds of German Shepherd and pulled the dog into his chest and held on. Dalton went down on one knee beside the table. "Owen," he said. The man didn't respond to it. "Owen, it's Reeves." Nothing. The eyes came up and they were confused and frightened and full of tears, and they did not know him. And then Dalton did the only thing he had left. He took 2 dog tags out of his jacket pocket, wrapped face to face in black electrical tape, and he set them on the table. Owen Keller stopped moving. He looked at them for a long moment. Then, still with one arm around the dog, he reached out with the other hand, and his thumbnail went to the folded tail of the tape, exactly where it had been left, and he peeled it back one turn and stopped. And he began very quietly to sob. Delia came in. She'd heard him from the corridor. Dalton would find out later that she'd made it 3 steps into the hallway, way before her legs quit, and Patrice had caught her under the arm, and that she had come the rest of the way, holding onto the handrail. She stopped 6 feet from the table. Owen. The man looked at her, and for 1 second when something moved behind his eyes that was not confusion. Owen, it's Dee. She was crying so hard she could barely shape it. It's Delia. It's your sister. Oh God, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I stood there and I said, thank you. I said, thank you twice. I thanked a man for handing me a flag and you were, she couldn't finish. He reached his hand out towards her and it was shaking and she got to him and folded down onto her knees and put her forehead against his shoulder. And he held onto his sister with one arm and his dog with the other and made a sound that had no language in it at all. And in the doorway, Junie Keller stood absolutely still. She didn't run to him. That was the thing that undid Dalton more than any of it, more than the sound the man made, more than the tape peeling one turn the 9-year-old did not run. She stood in that doorway and she looked at the man for a long time and Dalton watched her do the arithmetic that a child should never have to do, that this was her father and that she did not remember his face and that his face wasn't his face anymore anyway and that he did not know who she was. Junie, Delia said, baby, come here. In a minute. She walked over slowly. She put the folder she'd been carrying on the table, and she opened it and took out a piece of paper, old soft, folded into quarters crayon on the back of a grocery flyer, and she unfolded it and smoothed it flat with both hands. 3 figures, a tall one, a small one holding its hand, and a dog with a black back and gold legs. Owen Keller looked down at it. Junie did not ask him if he remembered her. She did not ask him where he'd been or why he hadn't come home, or whether he'd meant to miss 7 birthdays. She did not ask him a single question at all. She pulled out the chair beside him and sat down and picked a blue crayon up off the floor and put it in his hand. You can finish it, she said. There's still the sky on. He never fully came back. Dalton wanted badly to be able to say otherwise. The truth was that Owen Keller had taken a compression fracture of the left temporal bone and 11 years of untreated damage on top of it, and 4 years of institutional care under a number, and there is no version of that where a man simply resumes. He got about 40 words back over the following year. He never got Junie. He could not produce it, though he responded to it every single time. He could not tell anybody what happened in the Gulf of Aden and never would. The tape he'd made when he still had language had in the end been the only statement he was ever going to give. His identity was confirmed in 9 days through the dog. That was the piece nobody could believe. Delia's attorney pushed for dental and got a mess because the reconstruction had rewritten half of it. DNA took 6 weeks because of the lab queue. But the military working dog custody file had a tattoo code in it and a handler's name on the first assignment line and an admin hold "Do not enter in central" scrawled across the second, and that piece of paper, a photocopy in a plastic tote in a boat engine void, was what forced the first door. An animal's paperwork was better maintained than a man's. Delia said that out loud one night at the kitchen table and then put her head down on her arms and didn't lift it for a while. The Board for Correction of Naval Records issued its determination 14 months after the hearing. The transposition finding was vacated in full. The narrative was amended. The line about Petty Officer Keller was struck from the safety curriculum, where it had lived for 9 years and been read aloud. Delia later calculated to somewhere north of 40,000 sailors. 4 amended letters went to 4 families. Dalton drove Delia to Rhode Island for one of them because Kaminsky's mother had asked to meet somebody who was there, and he sat in her living room for 2 hours and answered every question she had, including the ones with no good answers, and when she asked him whether her son had suffered, he told her the truth instead of the kind thing, and she thanked him for it. 11 years, she said at the door. 11 years I've been angry at a boy who didn't do it. Yes, ma'am. And there's nobody to be angry at now. No, ma'am. That's worse, she said. I want you to know that's worse. Wendell Pike pleaded to 2 federal counts and cooperated fully and did 14 months. Ray Sutter was not charged. He testified 4 separate times and stopped drinking, and as far as Dalton knew, still did not sleep. He sent Junie a birthday card every June with actual writing on it, which Dalton found almost unbearable and never mentioned. Ironvale Maritime Logistics restructured, sold 2 subsidiaries, and settled with the government for a number with 8 digits in it and no admission of wrongdoing. And Curtis Vaughn retired. That was it. That was the whole thing. 69 years old, health reasons, a 2-paragraph release. He was never charged because 11 years of small, reasonable decisions do not assemble into a chargeable act, and because everything he had ever signed, he had signed inside an authorization he could point to, and because the 2 people in the chain who could have named the room he'd been briefed in were both dead of ordinary causes. He kept his pension. He kept his house. He appeared 8 months later on the advisory board of a maritime insurance group in Norfolk. Dalton found out about it from a Google alert sitting in his truck. He read it 3 times and waited to feel rage. And what came instead was so much worse, a flat, exhausted recognition that Vaughn had told him the exact truth at that restaurant table, and Dalton had refused to hear it because the truth was unbearable. Nobody did it. It got done. He put the phone face down and sat there for a long time with his hand on the dog. "That's the part, isn't it?" he said. "That's the part we don't get." Ronan put his chin on Dalton's leg. "Everybody wants the guy in handcuffs. That's the ending people want." Dalton shook his head slowly. "There isn't a guy. There's 100 people who each did one small, quiet thing, and every one of them can explain it, and the sum of it put a man in a chair for 4 years with a number instead of a name." He looked out the windshield. "And the system's still here," he said. "It just knows one more thing to be careful about." The insurance settlement money went to Junie in a trust she couldn't touch until she was 25 into Owen's care, and to a supplemental fund for the 4 families that Delia set up and administered herself because she did not trust anybody else with the arithmetic. Nobody offered Dalton Reeves anything. He didn't ask. There was a moment in a lawyer's office when somebody floated the phrase material contribution, and Dalton stood up and left the room, and Delia found him in the parking lot and said nothing, and stood next to him for 6 minutes, which was exactly the right thing. He got a bed, though. Delia's basement had an outside entrance and a wood stove and a bathroom, and she put it to him as a business arrangement, rent and labor split Firewood Drive Owen to Chelsea and back on Thursdays, and Dalton understood it was charity dressed as a job, and he understood she dressed it that way on purpose, and he took it. He slept indoors for the first time in 3 years and 8 months. The first night he couldn't. He went out at 2 in the morning and sat in the truck bed with the dog for 2 hours, and Delia saw the door light and came out in a coat over pajamas and sat down on the tailgate next to him and didn't ask a single question. "It's stupid," he said finally. "It's not. I've got a bed 40 feet that way." "Dalton." She pulled the coat tighter. "You spent 3 years teaching yourself that this truck was enough. That's not a thing you undo in one night because somebody gave you a stove." He laughed and it surprised him. "You know what he said to me at that restaurant, Vaughn?" He looked at his hands. "He said he wanted to talk about the fact that I live in a truck. Like he was going to fix it, like that was one of the levers." "It probably was." "That's the thing that gets me," Dalton said. "It wasn't even a bribe. He genuinely thought he was being decent." I went back and bought another lot. It was March by then, and the money came out of the firewood work and 2 months of hauling for the co-op. And it was $650 for 81 units out of the same Bangor annex, and Reina Ocasio processed it without a word. And then, as he was leaving, said, "Hey, Reeves." He turned. "That thing you said about making a bag stop existing." She was looking at her screen. "I put in a ticket. It took 9 months and 4 people, but there's a validation now. A tag can't print without a PNR attached. Whole system, not just here." Dalton stood in the doorway. "You did that." "I filed a ticket," Reina said. "That's not the same as doing something." "Yeah," Dalton said, "it is." He opened the 81 bags on the fish pier because the pier was free and because he was at this point a local story that people had gotten bored of. Sully Marchetti came over with a coffee he had no intention of drinking. "So what are we looking for this time?" "Nothing." "Come on." "There's nothing in there, Sully." Dalton kept sorting. "There was never going to be anything in there. It's clothes and chargers and somebody's dead uncle's fishing reel." "Then why'd you buy it?" Dalton looked up. "Because somebody's got to open them," he said. "Sully didn't have anything for that. Bag 44 had a wedding album in it. Dalton set it aside in its own spot the way he'd done with the first one, and this time he actually did the third thing. He opened it to the back where people write and found a name and spent 2 weeks in 11 phone calls and found a woman in Duluth who had thought that album was gone forever. She cried on the phone for 4 minutes. I didn't charge her the shipping. That was the year that started. Not a business exactly, not a mission either, just a man with a truck and a doig and a habit of not being able to leave a thing unopened, working through other people's lost belongings one at a time, sending back what had a name on it, and selling what didn't for enough to buy the next lot. The local paper did a piece. Then a bigger one. He turned down the television people twice and the third one 3 times. They want to make you a hero, Delia said. I know. You're not going to let them. No. Why not? Dalton thought about it. Because if I'm a hero, he said, then it's a story about one guy being good. And it wasn't. It was a contract renewal that got missed by 4 days. On the second Thursday of every month, he took Owen out. Just the two of them and the dog in the truck down to the water at Owl's Head, where the yard had been, which was clear to land now and would probably be condos. Owen liked the truck. He couldn't say why, and Dalton never needed him to. They sat there in October on the fourth one with the tailgate down and Owen in a folding chair, and Ronan lying between them with his head on Owen's foot. 14th today, Dalton said. Owen looked at him. Yeah, Dalton said. You know. Owen's hand went to the dog's neck. I carried you, Dalton said. I want to say that once out loud, and then I'm going to stop saying it. Third position, left shoulder. And I knew the box was wrong. I felt it on the corner. And I said nothing for 11 years because saying something would have cost me a career I ended up losing anyway. He looked out at the water. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't think you've got the words for it, and I don't think I'd take it if you did. Owen made a sound. Dalton turned. The man was working his mouth hard in the way that meant something was coming, and it took maybe 15 seconds, and what finally came out was ruined and flat and barely shaped. Reeves. Dalton did not move for a long moment. Yeah, he said. Yeah, that's me. Junie turned 10 in June. She got a card in the mail with nothing written on it and a smudge of green crayon in the bottom corner. And it was the 8th one, and it had been mailed from 400 yards away by a man in a chair who had a nurse by the stamp, and she put it in the shoebox with the other 7. Why, Delia asked her. He's here. You can just talk to him. I know. Then why do you want the card? Junie shrugged the way children do when adults ask them to explain something that is completely obvious. Because he still sends it, she said to him. Dalton Reeves was 46 years old the day the record correction came through, and he read it standing up in a basement apartment with a wood stove and a black and red flannel shirt and a burnt orange leather jacket he had never once replaced with a German shepherd asleep against his boot. 4 paragraphs. Bureaucratic. No apology anywhere in it because the Navy does not apologize, it corrects. He read the line about Petty Officer Keller 3 times. Then he crouched down and took hold of the dog's head with both hands and put his forehead against the flat of the skull between those ears and stayed there for a while. You knew, he said. Ronan's tail moved once against the floor. 4 years in a truck, 4 years and you never got one thing wrong, and I thought you were just a dog with a hard start. Dalton's voice went. You were carrying him the whole time. You were the only one who never put him down. He sat back on his heels. A Navy had signed off. A board had reviewed. 19 men had stayed quiet. A colonel had eaten chowder and explained patiently and correctly that nobody had done it. And in the end, the entire apparatus was moved by an animal who walked across a day room and put his head on a stranger's knee, because a dog had remembered a man that an entire country had agreed to forget.